Thank you. So first, I just want to comment that I'm so happy to live in a place like Fort Collins that supports a place like the Innisphere, and in a state that supports your office so that we can all do this and brings minds together to try and solve these problems. It's awesome. I also want to just point out that our logo is actually round, but like me, in the last 3.5 years, it's maybe stretched out a little bit. So, so Tim and I, who's serving over there with the giant gray beard, and I started a Horse and Dragon, and the bank started Horse and Dragon about 3.5 years ago. And we use a lot of water, and I will say at each step of our brewing process, there's a bunch of water involved. So we start with grain in the mash tun with water, transfer it over to the kettle. We add hops and a bunch of other delicious ingredients. Then transfer it to the fermenter where beer spends about 3 weeks in our facility. Then transferred for 24 hours to a bright tank, and then in our case transferred to kegs. And then, but most small breweries and large breweries in Colorado also bottle or can. We're actually adding a really small bottling line at the end of this year, and it'll be interesting to see how our water usage comes up. But anyway, so that's our water process for producing beer. But then, of course, there's a bunch of water used. Oh, I'm sorry. So beer equals hops and malt and yeast, and of course a ton of love. And I should have put a clock on there because also a lot of time. But the biggest ingredient is water. And if you're ever trying to reach consumers in terms of the importance of water, using beer is a great vehicle. Most of the well, not most. A lot of the products that are produced in Colorado use a ton more water per unit than beer does. But for a consumer, if you're looking at a glass of beer, you completely get that it's mostly water. So if you're a water person and you want to send the message that water is important, be sure to invite a brewery to partner with you. But we also use water in a bunch of other parts of our processes. We clean everything. We clean inside the tanks, which I did not climb into to take a photo, but we also clean outside the tanks. You heard a lot about, similar to distilling, a lot of water is used in the cleaning process, and also apparently in coffee. And then, of course, we have a tap room, which, sorry, the picture of the toilet maybe wasn't the best thing. We should have maybe done the dishwasher. But, yeah, we do use a lot of water just for the people who come to visit to try our beers. And then landscaping is, of course, another use of water. So the giant breweries that you hear about in the States that are super efficient, they've been long established. They produce a ton more beer than we do. This year we'll produce about 2,000 barrels of beer. A barrel is 31 gallons. So we'll produce about 2,000 barrels this year. The bigger breweries that I would say are 50,000 barrels and above are generally long established and are producing a decent profit margin and are able to implement a bunch of conservation efforts. The vast majority of us are well under that. Under 50,000 barrels a year in Colorado, well, actually across the nation, is over 90% of the breweries. So the big guys who are really committed to their conservation efforts are shooting for between 3 and 4 gallons of water per gallon of beer produced. And I would wager to bet that most of us are using a lot more water than that. When we measured, we were using about 7 to 1. This is also a target for smaller breweries, and we were psyched to hear that that's all we were using. We haven't implemented our bottling line yet, so that will change. Tim and I waited until we're fairly ancient to do this and sunk our whole life savings into it, as well as that of our parents and the bank. And we committed to a lot of water-saving devices in our brewery. The vast majority of people who are starting breweries don't have the luxury of doing that. So I would guess that they're using quite a lot more water per gallon of beer produced than 7. Using Fort Collins as a microcosm, we have 21 craft breweries here in Fort Collins, probably 23 or 25 by the end of the year, so stay tuned. And of those 21 microbreweries, our craft breweries, there are 6 of us that have a single meter coming into the facility where we can measure the amount of water we use overall for our process. And of those 6, so that means 15 are sharing a meter with other people in their strip mall or wherever they're located. Their landlord is divvying up the water bill and charging them according to that. Most of them are not eager to twig their landlord to the fact that they're possibly using more water than who's next door to them. But they are all, across the board, we meet regularly, quarterly. We have a brew water group that's about water use in breweries in Fort Collins. And every single one of us is highly concerned about the primary ingredient in our, both the quality and the quantity of the primary ingredient in our craft. So they would like to know how much they're using, but they don't want to ask their landlord. So of those 6, 2 have meters on their processes. And one of those 2 would be interested in having additional meters on additional processes. So for us, for example, we know how much water is coming into our building, but we don't know how much is going to the tap room versus the brewery. We don't know how much is going to the first step of brewing, the mash tun, how much is lost in the mash tun and goes out to the farmer or the drain until it gets into the kettle, how much goes from the kettle to the fermenter, how much gets eventually into the final beer. We are unable to analyze what in our process uses the most water. From month to month, we cannot tell if there's a spike in usage in some process, where there might be a leak, where there might be somebody who's got some operator error or opportunity for improvement. We have no way of measuring that. So as Andrew, where's Andrew? Andrew was my mentor in Denver last week, running through this, one of the 2. And he had this fantastic quote after listening to it: "You cannot change what you don't measure." I would say that most breweries in the United States are very interested in taking care of their water, but the vast majority of us can't measure it. So please, if you're out here and you're an innovative soul or an engineer who's looking for a project, invent a way for us to measure water in our process. So I'll just comment, we want to measure because, of course, we're great corporate citizens, and this could be any brewery's logo. Every craft brewery that we've met, the owners are very interested in taking care of this vital resource, not just for themselves and their product, but also for their community, including breweries in the Great Lakes region, which is one of the only places in the States that is anticipated to have enough water in the next 25 years to continue brewing at the rate that the rest of us are brewing. So all of us are concerned about water. Also, of course, our consumers love the fact that we're trying to take care of a resource that we all share. And then sadly, the last bit would be an economic incentive. I looked at May for us. May of this year, we spent $1,000 on electricity. We spent $1,000 on yeast. We spent about $14,000 on grain. We spent who knows how much money on hops. That's a quarterly contract, so we can't. I shouldn't say we can't. I don't have time to break that out. I don't even want to talk about payroll, how much we spent on that. But on water, we spent $125. So there's not a huge economic incentive for us to do this. Even the rebates that we're available for in a really progressive city like Fort Collins don't drive us to make these changes. But because we are responsible business partners in our communities, I think that a way to measure our water use would be a standard piece of brewery equipment if we could afford it. So my specific suggestion, although I've been told not to focus on this because you're allowed to let your mind range over what the solution is. But my specific solution would be portable flow meters external flow meters that can measure water, that we can move from one process to another. Horse and Dragon would love to be able to buy 7 of these. We might invest a little more in them than most people, but I think if you could price them around $200 a piece, small breweries would buy at least one. Larger breweries would buy one for every part of their process. There are a few giant breweries. New Belgium is a great example. They are like a sustainability leader for businesses around the world who have flow meters on every piece of their process. But the rest of us do not. So my easy solution to it would be external flow meters that we can move around. There's a couple of problems with current available options. Inline flow meters they cost about $2,000 plus installation. A lot of smaller breweries do not have the pipe length that allows for the carving out that much space to add a flow meter to it, and it disrupts production, of course. External flow meters, they do exist. Most of the ones that I can find are ultrasonic, and they don't measure water well. So once beer is wort or beer, they can measure the chunky bits of liquid, but they have a really hard time accurately measuring pure water, which happily in Fort Collins we have amazingly pure water, which is why Fort Collins makes such great beer. One of the many reasons, I guess. But there are a few ways you can play with external flow meters, ultrasonic flow meters, to try and jimmy that. You can add some reliable ripples to the stream of water. You can add some gas to that water. We don't want gas in our water when we're measuring the water input and output. But if anyone twigs to this idea, please feel free to come and visit us, or any of the breweries in town. I'm sure would be happy to work with you. We do have a few places in our process where we have joints and are constantly moving pieces in and out of that. If there's something that we can slide in there then that would measure the amount of liquid that's moving from one step to another, we would love to invest in that. And I think I speak for a bunch of the breweries around the US. So how many of those could you sell? And for how much? I already mentioned. For us, we might be willing to invest a little more. I think I could talk most of the breweries in Fort Collins into investing into a $200 product. I could talk Tim into investing into more. So, but if you really want to hit all of us, you got to bring it down a little. So there's 350 of us in Colorado. You can do the math on that. And let's say we each buy 3 on average. As I said, Horse and Dragon would buy 7. Some people buy 1. A few would buy 0. But let's say we do 3. You go ahead and do the math on what your price is. In the States, there's 5,300 of us. Of course, you shouldn't be limited by the States. If you love international travel, this would be a great project for you. Then, of course, there's all these other industries, I think, that would use it. This last one, urban farming or small farms. We have a CSA. I'm pretty sure that they would love to be able to measure where they're using their water easily and reliably. And, of course, municipalities that, unlike Fort Collins, maybe haven't invested in individual measurements. There are plenty of municipalities that could use this, whatever your measuring device is going to be when you invent it. And then in Colorado, the water savings, we produce about 1.5 million barrels of beer times 31 gallons per barrel. Of course, the big guys are responsible for the majority of that, but the small breweries are still responsible for about 500,000 barrels of that every year, and going up every year. So any shaving slash savings that we can make on that production would be awesome. One of the bigger breweries in town I spoke with, who told me that if he estimated that their process engineer estimated that if breweries just installed measuring devices, we could save approximately 15% of our water usage without major investment. So if we multiply, say, 500,000 barrels, which is us minus the big guys who already have some of these measuring devices in place, 500,000 barrels times 15% savings for water, we save a fair amount of water for other uses in Colorado. So anyway, I think that's it. That's my plea, and a huge thanks to the people who put this together.